for people that camp, and especially people that camp with the same group all the time, those things become settled in our minds. We learn what's been acceptable in the past. We've come to know the boundaries by experience, not by definition.
This is Joe with the Paddle and Portage Podcast. Today we're going to talk about an absolute icon in the paddling world, the Boundary Waters, Quetico scene, but far beyond that too. We're going to talk about Dan Cooke in the episode. So that's the theme. Stick around. It's a really powerful episode, one we're honored to share. Want to remind you that we can't do this, make the podcast, without your support. That includes support for Paddle and Portage, the digital magazine that we produce monthly. Having a blast doing that. So many amazing stories. And thank you to all the subscribers in that community that continues to grow for Paddle and Portage. And you can become a member too at paddleandportage.com. Super easy to do. Also get behind the scenes footage and bonus audio, things that's only available to subscribers, including, for this episode, a lengthy discussion that we had with Dan Cooke before he passed away in July. So that's just one of the features, one of the things that we offer to our community of subscribers. And we can't do this without our sponsors, including Loons Nest Coffee. They're on the Gunflint Trail. Coffee on the Wild is the theme. They're open 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. daily through October 27th. So we're still here in August. Plenty of time to hang out at Loons Nest. They're right before Trail Center off the Gunflint, right by the turn to Hungry Jack Road, mid-Gunflint Trail area. Can't miss it. Loons Nest Coffee. They're open at 7. That's the huge thing. The only place that's open that early up the trail. 7 a.m. Loons Nest Coffee. Bob and the crew keeping it real at Loons Nest. Let's jump in to the episode.
Welcome to episode 12 of the Paddle and Portage Podcast. I'm M. Baxley.
I'm Joe Fredericks. We're here in Grand Marais.
We're sorry to say that it wasn't long ago that we lost a beloved member of our paddling community around the Boundary Waters and canoeing in general.
Just last month in July, Dan Cooke passed away.
If you don't know who Dan Cooke is, you probably know Cooke Custom Sewing, a staple of gear for many of our paddling adventures for years. If you've ever used a piece of Cooke Custom Sewing gear, you're already connected to the man, Dan Cooke.
You and I both had the chance to meet Dan a couple different times over the years, and he was one of the people who, when we reach out for interviews or media anywhere across the Boundary Waters or Minnesota or this part of the country, reach out to do interviews with people about paddling, there's names like Cliff Jacobson, Bear Paulson, Rob Kesselring. Those names often come up and people will interview him about things. Well, the person who the interviewees reach out to for advice and talk to about canoeing and gear was Dan Cooke. So in that sense, Dan was our mentor's mentor in a way. So that's a very unique thing about Dan, is that he was held in such high regard within this paddling community of which we exist.
Absolutely. I first met Dan in 2015 at the end of the Gunflint Trail for the Boundary Waters Expo. And it was in that context of paddlers sitting around a campfire that I heard some of his stories. But you've also heard the voice of Dan Cooke, who has contributed to our paddler profile for Bear Paulson. So in these many ways, we're already all connected.
That's right, and there was a great sense of that connection and community on display recently at Lake Nokomis in Minneapolis on August 10th, a Saturday. About 100 people came to honor Dan's life and legacy, and there was a paddling flotilla and a group of people that came to paddle, talk about canoeing, and talk about Dan Cooke. And we traveled down from Paddle and Portage headquarters here in Grand Marais, and we got to participate in that and hear and share stories about Dan. So let's head down to the shores of Lake Nokomis and hear from one of Dan's good friends and a well-accomplished paddler, Cliff Jacobson.
I think what you need to know about Dan that made him different from a lot of other people, first of all, he was an engineer. No college, but an engineer. Dan was so capable. He'd be the kind of guy that if you wanted to design a machine that cut potato chips into 29 different sections with flowers on them, Dan would design that for you. And so he put that kind of effort into every piece of equipment he made. And the difference is Dan used everything that he sold. He designed something around what he loved to do, which was canoeing and camping. And we became friends many years ago, and we worked on a number of products together. The Tundra tarp with the screen all around it. That came out of one of my Arctic trips where I was getting tired of getting eaten up by bugs. And the canoe covers, we started that a long time ago. I said, Dan, build me a canoe cover. Well, I made about a half a dozen of them. I got tired of making them, and Dan could sew way better than me, so that's how the covers started. But Dan was always a thinker. When he came out with a product, he would, if he got advice about it from people he respected, he would tune that baby, and he would listen. And even though it wasn't maybe exactly what he would have preferred, he appreciated and valued the experience of those around him. Kind of a quiet guy. He never said a whole lot, but he was an incredibly competent outdoorsman. And you don't see too many of those guys in the industry anymore. You know.
Were you in a canoe with him? Do a trip with them, anything like that?
Well, I did a lot of little day trips and things with Dan, but the big trip we did was, I'll never forget, on the Yellowstone River in Montana. And we did a lot of research on, and this was all solo canoes. So we did a lot of research on that trip, and we could not find any reference to any rapids of any difficulty. And then we got on this river. And I got to tell you, I have never paddled such huge rapids in my life in a solo canoe. We would have died without the covers on it. The current speed had to be 10 miles an hour, and the waves were 3 feet high. How did this happen? Well, we figured that out later. This is the western United States. They don't understand canoes out there. This is the land of rafts and drift boats. And so their rating, all their rapid rating were based on drift boats. Well, what's a 3-foot wave to a drift boat? Nothing. We just keep fishing. So, but Dan was paddling. All of us were, the rest of us guys, we were all paddling North Star Phoenix canoes, which is a pretty high volume tripping boat. Dan was paddling a Wildfire. Now, when Dan showed up with that Wildfire, I kind of looked at him and looked at that Wildfire a little bit, and I said, I don't know, he started getting into this stuff, but I got to tell you, he had no problems at all. The guy was a terrific paddler, not just freestyle, and he paddled freestyle very well, but he also understood currents and rapids, and he was all-around outdoors guy. Loved him, and I miss him.
So my name is Amy Cooke. My story that I can kind of remember about Dad is when I was growing up, I was too young to go with our youth group on the river trip that they were doing. So my mom brought us out for one night, and we hooked up with them on the river near a campsite to bring them extra food and whatnot and kind of like restore their packs. But there was one night on the river where there was a pretty rowdy group of bikers, they say, on the other side of the river, and so my dad sat outside next to the campfire the entire night with a hatchet on over his back, trying to be protective over the entire 20 people that were there with the church youth group. And so that was him, and most people just kind of remembered that from him. And then also, teaching canoe tips and tricks to everyone from the youth group. The big burly beard and the curly hair, you either get the lone wolf or you get the Santa Claus, and it's one of the two, and most people, you have to get past the big curly beard to see the Santa Claus part of him. So,
what do you think most authentically represents who your dad was?
Between Big Burly and Santa Claus, Santa Claus. He didn't always like to admit it, but He liked to stay silent. He spoke when necessary and when he had something to say.
I'm Jason Zaborski, owner of Ely Outfitting Company, and man, I met Dan way back in the day, and we bonded over our shared history guiding at the same place. We both guided at Adventurous Christians off the Gunflint Trail, and so that's how we kind of connected initially, and then got to know each other better through that kind of greater community that is people who love the Boundary Waters and love sort of travel systems that connect to the Boundary Waters. And so I just knew him mainly socially over the years, and then got to know him more also from a business perspective because, you know, he makes these incredibly bomber portage packs. And so we started, you know, buying all of our portage packs from him, and he was always fun to chat with because he always wanted to talk about the latest, greatest materials. And he knew everything about, you know, denier nylon and exactly how to make everything. I know when we started working with Dan for the business, he actually took, we had some modifications for the packs we wanted, and he went and he made a CAD line design, like with the exact specifications for our packs. And every time we got a pack from him, it was our own unique, custom, like perfect pack. And it was just amazing to work with him. Like his mind as an engineer and sort of a details guy was just incredible. And he loved talking about like how his packs were being used and what was going on in the wilderness. And he just loved it all. He loved the people who were using his packs. He loved the people who were buying his packs. And he was just passionate about it all. And his passion was just contagious. Just such an amazing person. Anybody who wanted to chat with him about gear or packs or the Boundary Waters or his treks to the far north, you know, he'd bend your ear for on and on and on. Great storyteller. Twinkle in his eye, big white beard, big smile, and just a generous person to be around.
Enjoy this episode of Paddle and Portage, brought to you by Women's Wilderness Discovery in Ely, Minnesota, gateway to the Boundary Waters. Experience canoe country in all seasons with our outfitted guided trips and workshops. Visit us online at womenswildernessdiscovery.com, Instagram, and Facebook. Discover your inner strength outdoors.
Hi, I'm Nathan Cooke. I'm Dan Cooke's son.
So we've got a good crowd around us right here today at the pavilion, Lake Nokomis. What's it mean to see this type of turnout and see these stories being shared?
This means the world to me. I'm happy to be able to host this event here and give everyone the opportunity to come and share their stories and memories of Dan, and to be able to see how much he's impacted all the people here just means the world to me, and my sisters as well. A lot of the people here I've known for many, many years, my whole life. So to get a chance to re-meet so many people and remember these stories, I had a few good ones. Some of them are a little more private, and I don't know that I'd say on a recording, but good stories of Dan for certain.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes someone's passing to bring community and stories together like this. I guess what we could think of as one of the brighter sides of someone's passing is that we get to hear stories and see how many people have been impacted by someone like Dan. I mean, this seems a much more a vibe of celebration of life as opposed to a really sorrowful experience. And I think your dad would be happy about that aspect.
I believe my father would be very happy, and I know my mother would be too. She very much wanted a celebration of a life well lived. So.
Yeah. And was it your idea to do the paddle canoe parade?
Had some help with a few of Dan's friends on that one, but my idea was to come and paddle in Lake Nokomis, and a few of Dan's close friends helped decide that a canoe parade would be a great event.
Yeah.
So
it was this a place that he paddled, or why was this the chosen spot?
Yes, this was a place where it was every other Thursday night he would do paddling instructions here, and he would bring his canoe and another and teach people how to paddle here at Lake Nokomis. So
for a long time he did that?
For a number of years, yeah.
And what's the plan, if I can just ask you briefly about moving forward with the company and things like that?
Well, officially, I took over the company on the start of the year, so I've already been the owner now for a couple of months. But the plan is to continue forward and do my best to live up to Dan's reputation.
Hi, I'm Laura Mullen, co-founder of Bent Paddle Brewing Company in Duluth, Minnesota. Here at Bent Paddle, we make quality craft beer and hemp cannabis beverages from the clean water of Lake Superior. On your way up to the BWCA, be sure to check out our Lincoln Park Craft District tap room to get a stainless steel or growler to go, or find Bent Paddle at restaurants, bars, and liquor stores throughout Minnesota. Let Bent Paddle be the bridge that lets good memories and conversation flow while you're reflecting on the perfect campsite or the splendidness of the Northern Lights. For more info, visit bentpaddlebrewing.com or check us out on Facebook or Instagram. Cheers!
Hi, I'm Bear Paulson. I have spent a lot of time in the woods with Dan Cooke. I've known him about 30 years. Winter camped with him, canoed with him. He joined me and a family on the New Year's trip. We paddled rivers in Alaska and Nunavut together, and as well as throughout Minnesota. And the story I want to share is of a trip that we actually did on the Current River in Missouri. And so I had said, hey, I've got a week free in the fall. Maybe I should try to put people together and grab a group that we can go down the current. And so it was Dan and my sister and my wife, my son, and a couple other friends. And I tapped Dan to drive because he had a pickup with a double rack, so he could take two boats and we could take one boat on our van, and that would allow us to get all 7 of us, because it was my son going, who was about 2.5 at the time, allow us to all get in together. And so we paddled the 11 point, and then we paddled the current. And when it came time to shuttle the current, we left our van at the top of the river and we shuttled Dan's pickup to the bottom. And so when we got to the bottom, we said, we're going to try to put everybody in the pickup. So 3 boats on top and everyone in the pickup. And that was crowded. You know, that's a full load. We got everybody all set up. And Dan looked at me and he said, well, you should drive. And I said, why? It's your truck. And he said, because I'm going to go in the back. And I said, why are you going in the back? He said, well, somebody's got to go in the back. And I said, but it's your truck. And he said, I'm going in the back. And that was pretty classic Dan, because he would always share. He was always generous. And most of all, he was very, very humble and a great friend that I'm going to miss a lot.
I'm Claire Porter, and I've always known Dan through Midwest Mountaineering, but I really got to know him when I started dating Bear Paulson, because they'd been best buds for ages. Right after I started dating Bear, we went on this epic canoe trip to the Barren Lands in Canada, and Bear was so excited because Dan Cooke had wanted to come, and so we found a paddling partner for Dan, and on that trip is when I really fell in love with him, because he's such a generous, wonderful soul, and so kind. On Dash's first winter camping trip, when he was just a little babe, we popped over to CCS headquarters for some reason, I don't remember. And Bear was talking to Dan, and I was just holding the baby. And just playing with the baby, whatever. I turned around, and all of a sudden, Dan has cut out a triangle of fleece, run it through a sewing machine, turned it inside out, and said, try this on. And so Dash had a little wizard's hat poking straight up into the air, made like that from fleece, that Dan had just thought, he needs a hat. And I don't know if folks who don't winter travel with Dan know, but I have never seen him with a store-bought hat. He always makes his hats with just a triangle of fleece sewn up one side. And he has a little trick where he adds eyes and a nose and a mouth hole and rolls that part up so he can pull it over his face like it was a mask. Well, Dash wore that hat as much as I could get it on him. He loved it. He'd wear it to sleep. He'd wear it all through the winter camping trip. And 2 years later, he grew out of it. And Dan said, I got to get you guys another one. So Dan made one, and it was too big. And so he made another, and he said, Dash can grow into that one. But I secretly put it on my own head. Dash is never getting that big when it's too big, because now I have myself a Grandpa Dan hat. And so whenever we go out in the winter, I say, Dash, do you want to wear your regular hat or your Grandpa Dan hat? And he always likes his Grandpa Dan hat.
I'm Ann Passes. I'm out here in the Boundary Waters. The sun is setting. I was catching walleye. The lake is just like very still and the reflections are amazing. And the smoke haze is adding to the atmosphere. And saw a few loons earlier fishing very close to us. So these are some of the reasons that it's so important to support organizations like the Friends that work to protect this incredibly beautiful, one-of-a-kind place. Find them online at friends-bwca.org.
I'm Cassidy Ritter, part owner of Voyageur Canoe Outfitters. It's August and we are still booking trips. My personal favorite time to paddle is fall. It's beautiful, it's got amazing weather, minimal bugs, less people. So book online on our online website or by giving us a call or sending us an email. And if you mention Paddle and Portage Podcast, you'll get 10% off your trip.
And while most of the day Lake Nokomis was a celebration of Dan's life, a lot of enthusiasm in the stories, there was still some emotions that came out, some sadness, even in the reflection of beautiful memories of Cooke Custom Sewing.
Hi, I'm Cheryl McFerrin, and I've worked for CCS for over 6 years now, and Nate will tell you I'm the boss and he just pays the bills, so I don't know what to say.
What's it like being inside Santa's workshop?
It's gonna be quiet. It's gonna be quiet. Most people who met him casually were like, oh, he's a very quiet guy. I'm like, no, he'll talk your ear off. He will talk and talk and talk. So it's going to be quiet. And I'm going to miss him. We did think of a funny story for you, though.
Okay.
So, his communication basically left him at the beginning of the year. But he'd still pop into the shop and make funny faces at me, and I was doing something, and obviously I was doing it wrong, and he made certain that I knew that, and I'm like, old man, go away, you're pestering me, and he flipped me off. And Nate and I both looked at each other and went, did he really just do that? And then he did it again to make certain that we saw it. And I'm like, Dan, what are you doing? He just smiled and walked away. No, his joke was that he could do no wrong and Nate didn't do anything, and so everything was my fault. So I'm going to miss that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
How was it today to have does this bring maybe a little more closure to anything, or just reinforce what you thought about him to see all these people?
It was amazing. It was utterly amazing to see the turnout today. And, the number of people who sent us messages saying that they couldn't be here today. We had, 47 boats out on the lake today celebrating Dan, So it was amazing to see.
Yeah.
And it's been good to talk to people and hear stories. And so.
Yeah, thanks. Will you just
Joe Fredericks and I agree that the best way to show our appreciation for Dan is to hear from Dan Cooke himself. When I spoke with him a few years ago, we got together to talk about his role in the life of Bear, his wife Claire, and their child Dash. But that conversation was so much more than just family life on the water. Dan, who sometimes is a man of few words, shared many words with us about what it means to be a part of this community. Here he is.
Yeah, it's hard to, I think, for young people that don't have a connection to the wilderness, how do they start that connection? How do we make it available to them to where it seems possible? Because when you don't know what you don't know, what we don't know often keeps us from moving towards things, moving towards a goal. We don't know what it takes, and we don't want to fail. I think that's a big part of our life, is we don't want to fail. You know, a lot of people, their biggest fear of the wilderness is they don't know how to take a poop in the woods.
Right.
It's all comfort level with so many different things. You take people out camping for the first time, and what do you do when you get to camp after you're done canoeing? Pull up to the campsite. Where's the safe spot? Where is it that I am always welcome? People's tents seem like they're personal property, and you don't want to transgress that space. You know, how close do I come to someone else's tent? When someone's in a tent, how do you approach it? When you want to talk to that person and they're in the tent, where do I go when I want to express that I'm open for, you know, social interaction at a campsite? You know, the campfire is a big thing. Where the grate is in the Boundary Waters, people know when they go to the grate, that's a community space. Setting up a tarp by the grate, you know, just provides that spatial location of, I'm welcome here. This is where, you know, I can openly be, where my friend or mentor I can interact with them. Because we've all gone to seemingly smaller and smaller and more personal tents or hammocks or whatever. And those personal spaces add another layer of unknown, you know, boundaries that we're not sure of. For people that camp, and especially people that camp with the same group all the time, those things become settled in our minds. We learn what's been acceptable in the past. We've come to know the boundaries by experience, not by definition. You know, sometimes these words that come out, you know, they stumble out. They've never been verbalized before or put in that, you know, train of thought, but how to gather them together into a way to instruct others, to promote being comfortable in the wilderness with other people. Every group sets up their own boundaries. It's not a universal thing. The boundaries that seemingly I have with Bear and Claire is much different than if I was to go with a different group. You know, that's life. We get thrown into other situations, you know, be it going to a concert or a movie, or heaven forbid on a blind date or something, and to a group of people or whatever, we all being thrown into a situation where we don't have previous experience of finding those acceptable boundaries, acceptable ways to do things. You look at the tradition of Minojan, and they have long generational ties to the Boundary Waters through that. They develop a community. The kids develop their own way of relating to each other and to the wilderness. As a young person, the wilderness was a place to test my manhood, more or less, you know, my coming of age, my ability to physically overcome the challenges that were presented. And I still enjoy the challenges that it does. They're fun things to talk about, you know. We remember the hardships in far greater detail than we remember the beautiful sunsets and the glorious days of calm water and wind at our back. we can recount many times over the wind in our face and the hordes of mosquitoes and the pelting rain and hail and stuff. But the beautiful sun in your face is, you don't spend as much time discussing that. The adversity has so much more detail to it. The beauty of the sunset, you can discuss it for a few minutes or two, and yeah, that's it. The wind, how it hit your face and stung your skin and turned your hands cold and filled the canoe, and all of that you could go on and on about. And then it opens up the story of how another person overcome the adversity that they had, where the wind caught them unaware and almost tipped them over. And there's more depth in overcoming than there is in that innate desire within us to see the beauty and the wonder of the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
Our initial going out there is, I think, because of this hole in us that wants us to see the beauty of nature, that we want to wonder and marvel at how trees get to be trees, and how the wind, you can follow its course across the water as it blows, and all these ways that we see beauty, undisturbed nature, that's so hard to find in the city setting. Everything's so confounded by man's manipulation of our environment. But rarely do we see the depth of the beauty and the wonder of how a tree grows to be 50, 60 feet tall from a small little seedling, and how all that all works. It's something that has to come from within. The articulation has to begin there. Hearing someone else talk about it, it doesn't resonate quite as deep as when you experience it.
The opportunity to introduce somebody to that magic is really special when you get to take somebody in and watch them see that for the first time.
Yeah, and often they don't know how to articulate that it's so new and so wonderful to them. It takes a while for that experience to go deep into them. Often they don't see the depth of the beauty. It's like looking at a wonderful painting from across the room. You can tell it's a wonderful painting, and there's beauty in it. But when you get closer and closer to it, you see the depth of the beauty and understand maybe not even understand, but you experience how every brushstroke led to the greater composition, that you could see the beauty from afar, but it as you're up close, you get to see the detail of the beauty, what led to the totality of it. And you can't all do that on one trip. As an 8-year-old that fell in love with canoeing at summer camp, so much so that I came home and told my dad we have to get a canoe. That led to my life's passion of canoeing.
No one had to convince you of that.
No, to this day, I attribute it to summer camp and 8 years old and never having seen or heard of a canoe before in my life, and getting in one and floundering around with a big old grumman, at 8 years old, with someone else in the canoe that knew just as much as I did.
Yep.
It was fun, and it seemingly opened up a world of possibilities that I wanted to experience in much greater depth. I couldn't articulate that. I just know I wanted to canoe more.
Right. And that's all that mattered.
Yeah, all that mattered. Dad bought a canoe a couple of years later, I believe. It was a plastic canoe made out of the same ABS plastic like they make the pipe out of, this drain pipe. Like I tell everyone, I get the last laugh, though, if the bear goes after me.
Why is that?
Because when he gets down to gnawing on my hip and chips a tooth on my artificial hip, that I get the last laugh.
whenever we lose somebody in this incredible community of paddlers, it's felt most deeply by those closest to the individual that's lost. So even if you weren't in Dan's closest circle, you've probably lost somebody. So this episode is for all of us, because each one of us matters in this place.
And that was really felt at the event at Lake Nokomis, that there were people there who clearly knew Dan for many, many years and had a lot of paddling experiences and memories to share. And there were some people, I think, who just held Dan in high regard and used his gear and wanted to partake in the flotilla and be there and share this sense of community and reflection, even loss that was there that day, but also as a part of we're all moving forward together. With Dan's legacy intact, the company continues, as we heard from Nate, and just that celebration of life in the most authentic way.
Thanks for being a part of this celebration. We appreciate each of you, our listeners, our community. This is for you and for us.
And next time, if you get to Horseshoe Lake, just south of Poplar in the Boundary Waters, in that lake and that campsite that meant so much to Dan Cooke, tip your cap in that direction as you paddle by what he so lovingly described as butt crack rock.
Pull your pants up, for Christ's sake.
I like to sing, I love to dance, I play the fool if I got the chance, all around the campfire light, all around the campfire light. I got this out of tune old guitar, not trying to be no star, there's enough of them in a summer's night. Oh, there's enough of them in a summer's night. Well, you can look to Venus, you can look to Mars, I will set my sights by the northern star, and in the deep dark blue come the northern lights. Oh, and in the deep dark blue come the northern lights. Sing when I paddle canoe, feeling, not thinking if the strokes are true, we're gonna get through to the other side. Now, out in the night the waves beat the shore, you can hear them pounding, you can hear them roar. Oh, roll me, rock me in my dreams. You can roll me, rock me in my dreams. So I like to sing, I love to dance, I play the fool if I got the chance, all around the campfire light, all around the campfire light, all round, all round, all round the campfire light.